Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you. There's so much news to get to today, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk about Mark Carney and his trip to the European Union. He was in France and then England. We're going to talk about that testy exchange that he had with members of the press. It was really remarkable to see Mark Carney lash out at the liberal media. Mark Carney, you pay these people and they're happy to do your bidding. They're happy to do your dirty work. And yet he still can't get along with them. And he was speaking to them in a way that was really quite surprising for a liberal leader. We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about his cabinet. We will talk about Carney pledging to scrap the carbon tax, only to be outdone by the Conservatives, as Pierre Poilievre also came out saying that he would scrap the entire apparatus, including the industrial carbon tax. And later in the show, I'm very pleased to be joined by David Murray, who is a pollster who True North has hired to be our in-house pollster for the election. We're going to walk through his latest polls, what they say, what they show Canadians. And in order to see that interview, you must be a subscriber to Juno News. So I encourage everyone to head on over and subscribe to Juno. And while I have your attention, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and help us get more reach, and leave a comment. Let us know what you think of us here at Juno News. Okay, let's get right into it. So Mark Carney was in Europe. This is really interesting. He became prime minister, was sworn in last week, and his first thing that he does as a leader is leave Canada and go on this news junket, this official junket into France and the UK. So first we'll talk about him landing in France. Here he is. I noticed this and I posted it on X. Him and his wife are getting off the airplane and they're not met by French President Emmanuel Macron. Instead, they are met by the deputy of the French National Assembly, an individual named Roland Lescure. So to me, that seems like a little bit of a snub, don't you think? That he came to France, getting off the private jet there. You can see Stéphane Dion in the background. And Mark Carney is not met by an official delegation of the president, but instead he's met by some lowly official, which to me, wow, Mark Carney is the epitome of a globalist elitist. He said so himself. He was from the World Economic Forum, from the United Nations. You would kind of think that these are his people and that he would be met, with a king's welcome, and instead he is not. So what does that say? Very interesting. A lot of people were pointing to this clip that was going around on social media on Monday. Here he is in a joint presser with French President Emmanuel Macron, and Mark Carney is hyping up and talking about Canadian identity. He says that we are the most European, non-European country. Let's play that clip.
I want to ensure that France and the whole of Europe works enthusiastically with Canada, the most European of non-European countries.
So a lot was made of that single clip. It's interesting. I promise you, if a conservative said that, the left and the media and the liberals would be calling that conservative a racist, right? Because what Mark Carney is basically saying is like, we're the whitest country that's not in Europe. And again, if a conservative said that, that would be considered racist. But Mark Carney says a lot of people are saying, hey, that's really interesting. He's talking about our identity as Europeans. Usually liberals are talking about our identity as like a post-national, multicultural hodgepodge of different people from all over the world that doesn't have any core beliefs. Here, Mark Carney is talking about our connection to Western civilization and to the European continent, which is sort of interesting. It's not something that we've heard from a liberal. But again, I promise you, if a conservative leader had said that, it would be a huge controversy. And there was a lot of speculation as to why Mark Carney was in Europe. What was he doing over there? He's obviously trying to push back against US President Donald Trump by saying that Canada can forge different relationships. Canada can be part of a different union. Some were speculating, hey, maybe he is even talking about wanting to have Canada as part of the European Union. Maybe that's his angle and what he's trying to do over there. Interestingly, there was a poll put out by Abacus Polls over the same weekend, and they asked Canadians whether you would want to be part of the European Union, whether Canada is in North America, and whether we'd want to be part of the European Union. Remarkably, 44% of Canadians think that the Canadian government should definitely or probably look into joining the European Union, while only 34% are opposed to it and 27% are not sure. I don't understand those 44% of Canadians. Look, even the UK is at least part of Europe or closer to Europe than Canada. And they don't want anything to do with the European Union because all it is another layer of bureaucracy and, bureaucrats in Brussels telling elected officials what to do, telling people in the UK what to do. They had enough of it. That's what Brexit was. That's why they left the European Union. And here we have 44% of Canadians saying like, oh, I want in on that, whatever that is. Very, very strange. And I don't know if that's Mark Carney's angle going over there, but I think that is a terrible idea and that Canadians should have no part of it. Now, this is the issue of note that I want to talk about, which was that Mark Carney was clashing with Liberal reporters. So here he is in London at a press conference. I guess part of the Canadian press delegation came with Carney. They were in England, and everyone wanted to know about Mark Carney's blind trust. So we've covered this a lot on the show. Mark Carney is a very wealthy individual. He was the chair of Brookfield Asset Management, got into a little bit of trouble because he claimed that he had left Brookfield before that company made the decision to move from Toronto to New York. And then, of course, documents showed otherwise and showed that he actually recommended this to the board, and he signed that letter before he stepped down to run for the Liberal leadership race. So there's already a lot of contention around Mark Carney and his financial stake and where his money is invested and what companies he has money invested in. Obviously, it's very important to Canadians to know that because we need to know where his interests lie financially. Like, is he making policies that will just personally enrich himself? We don't know, and we need to know. And so what he did was he placed his assets into a blind trust, and now reporters are trying to get into the bottom of that. They want to know what is in the blind trust. Where's your money? What stocks do you hold them in? Who's managing it? All that information, of course, it's in the public interest. Journalists just doing their job here, trying to ask questions. And it's particularly of note just how Mark Carney reacts to it. He does not like scrutiny. He doesn't like people asking questions. He has this very condescending tone, and he starts speaking down to these reporters in a way that they haven't seen before. And so now you have Canada's media press really not knowing what to do because they know it's their job to promote Liberals. They want the Liberals to win the election. They want Mark Carney to continue to be the Prime Minister because it's the Liberal Party that guarantees money to journalism and money to journalists in the CBC and across the newspapers. But at the same time, this individual is not playing nice with them. And so it's a very interesting power dynamic going on. So the first clip I'm going to show you is Mark Carney getting into an exchange with Canadian Press's Stephanie Levitz about what assets he put into a blind trust. Let's play that clip.
We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements. As you know, because I know you know this, you know that these requirements come into effect in months.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
So sorry, my apologies. Stephanie Levitz now works with the Globe and Mail. And so he's just saying, like, what are you talking about? Just end it. Don't talk to me. Don't ask me these questions. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I've done everything I should. You can tell this is a person that doesn't have experience dealing with the press doing their job, which is simply asking him questions, right? This is not an adversarial press. This isn't a press that is out to get Mark Carney. To the contrary, they are defending Mark Carney at every opportunity, but they just want to know about his financial stake. Obviously, there could be conflicts of interest. We don't know what he's investing in. We don't know where his millions and millions of dollars are invested and how that might impact how he writes policy. So Canadians, of course, have a right to know. And just his very attitude there, really of note. And so it wasn't just Stephanie Levitz of the Globe and Mail. It was also CBC's Rosemary Barton, one of the #1 cheerleaders for the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau. She is also asking this question. And similarly, Mark Carney has no patience for it, and he treats her as such. So let's play this clip.
Are you saying you are not open to any conflict of interest?
Yes.
Trump spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a
a prior of conflict and ill will. I'm complying with all the rules. Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules. I'm complying with the rules that Parliament has laid out and the responsibilities of the Ethics Commissioner.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary, and check your ill will. So he's conditioning her. He's saying, how dare you ask me questions? Don't ask questions. I will turn it around on you and make it seem like there's something wrong with you, Rosemary Barton, for daring to ask me this question. This is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. A Conservative would never get away with this. Remember, Pierre Poilievre sort of rejects the premise of a question, and the Liberal media freak out and say he's a bully, and we get days and days of news stories about how mean Pierre Poilievre is. Mark Carney, you could argue, doing it even worse, to oppress it wants nothing more than to promote this individual. And they hardly even notice it. They let him get away with it. It is really unbelievable. So here is how the Globe and Mail, the Liberal Globe and Mail newspaper that gets money from the Liberal government through their bailout fund, this is how they report. It says, Mark Carney remains quiet on value of his assets in a blind trust. Isn't that polite? Here, I'll just read a little bit from their story. It says, Prime Minister Mark Carney declined Monday to reveal the value of the financial assets that he placed in a blind trust after he formed a new cabinet last week. In a testy exchange with reporters in London, Mr. Carney sidestepped questions about the value of his financial holdings and details of his assets and investments. I followed the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I followed them well in advance of any of the requirements, he said. Mr. Carney appeared annoyed when reporters reminded the former central banker and corporate executive that Canadians would not know the potential conflicts of interest which exist until after the coming election. Mr. Carney is expected this week to trigger a federal election for either April 28th or May 5th. The Conflict of Interest Act that outlines ethics rules for federal public office holders gives individuals 60 days after taking office to make the confidential report to the Ethics Commissioner. The holder has 120 days to make some of that information public. And so, of course, with that timeline, we'll already have an election and we won't even know what Mark Carney's financial stake is. And then this is where they get into the exchange. It says, what possible conflict would you have? Mr. Carney snapped, I am complying with the rules. And so it's just really interesting the way that they cover it. They kind of are almost covering up for him, even though he was being incredibly rude to their own reporter. And yet the Globe and Mail just has to remain completely polite and not even make a deal of the fact that Mark Carney was totally out of line. And so Mark Carney last week announced his new cabinet. And let me just tell you, it's basically the same as the Trudeau Liberal cabinet. We basically have a fourth term of Justin Trudeau. He has used the same cabinet that Justin Trudeau used to basically destroy Canada, to break Canada with immigration, with inflation, printing of money, with the carbon tax that made everything more expensive, the complete cost of living crisis that we are experiencing now. Well, those same ministers are now in Mark Carney's cabinet. So not much of a change, even though obviously the Liberals would like you to believe that they're totally different. So I'm just going to go through some of the notable appointments. We have Dominic LeBlanc, who will become the International Trade Minister. We have Francois Philippe Champagne, who will be the Finance Minister. And this is interesting because Champagne was speaking to Vasi Kapelos on CTV News, and he declared that this is a new era of fiscal responsibility for Canada, and it is a completely new era for Canada. Interesting. You can have the exact same cabinet as the former Trudeau government, the exact same policies, the exact same ideas, and yet you can just say it's a new era and it's a new Canada, and the press will nod along. Let's play that clip.
We're going to do things differently. Like I said, it's a new era of fiscal responsibility. This is a completely new era in Canada. We have been clear, we're going to spend less, we're going to invest more. We're going to build Canada of tomorrow.
So Liberals can say that it's a new era, but obviously is not. It's the same era. It's the same government. So we have Melanie Joly, who will remain as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We have Chrystia Freeland, who will remain in cabinet, and she will be the Minister of Transport. So no one is believing that this is a new era. Everybody is seeing through it, including some of our American friends. So here we have Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experiences podcast, where he says the truth, which is that Mark Carney will be more of the same as Justin Trudeau. Let's play that clip.
Trudeau is out, right? He's leaving. I feel
they
like
got a new guy who's just as bad.
Same thing.
But they got a new party. 150 people voted. Now they have a new guy running the country.
Joe Rogan speaking some truth there, and Pierre Poilievre congratulated Trudeau's economic advisor, Mark Carney, on becoming the prime minister and pointed out that it is the same cabinet as the Trudeau government. Let's play that clip.
And congratulating Mr. Trudeau's economic advisor, Mark Carney, on becoming prime minister. Today, Liberals are trying to trick Canadians into electing them for a fourth term in power with a cabinet that is 87% the same as Trudeau's cabinet. 100% of today's Liberal cabinet were in Justin Trudeau's Liberal caucus.
So same caucus, same cabinet, same government, basically Pierre Poilievre saying the truth there. And now Mark Carney is, of course, trying to distance himself from Justin Trudeau and from his record, even though, as Poilievre points out there, Carney was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, and he's obviously a climate zealot. He pushed the net zero approach in the UK that devastated that economy, and now he's about to do it in Canada, but he doesn't want anyone to know. So one of the first things that he has done is he has promised to scrap the carbon tax. We talked about this at the Liberal convention. He announced that he was going to be scrapping the carbon tax. He had said it before on the campaign trail. And the audience at the Liberal convention erupted in applause, even though that party has spent the last, 10 years pushing this idea of a carbon tax and saying that if you oppose a carbon tax, it's because you hate planet Earth and you want it to burn. And yet now here the Liberals, same Liberals, are saying that they are going to be getting rid of the consumer carbon tax. So super interesting. Another interesting thing that Mark Carney did was he sort of faked this ceremony. So here is a picture of Mark Carney signing what he calls an order in council in front of cabinet and the press, and basically saying on X, the consumer carbon tax is not working. It's become too divisive at a time when Canadians need to be united. As my government's first order of business, I have canceled it. And so he's sort of like cosplaying this idea of being like the president of the United States signing an executive order saying, I'm getting rid of this on day one. Of course, the Conservatives were there to point out that this was entirely fake. So here is Guy Giorno, a former chief of staff to the Conservative prime minister. He writes on X, whatever this is, it is not an order in council. An order in council is made by the Governor General on advice of the cabinet and not a I hereby instruct directive signed by the prime minister. Conservative MP Michelle Rempel echoes this and says executive orders don't exist in Canada. This paper isn't worth the Sharpie it's signed with. The carbon tax still exists, and Mark Carney is apparently busy signing fakes while trying to copy Donald Trump's daily executive signing ceremonies. Well, that didn't stop the Liberals from claiming and doing a victory lap about this on social media. So Liberals posted this on X. We just canceled the divisive consumer carbon tax. Our plan will make big polluters pay and build a stronger, more competitive environment. And they also wrote, we canceled the carbon tax while Pierre Poilievre offers empty slogans. We're taking action to fight climate change, put more money in your pocket, and build a strong economy. So answer this. How is it that you're helping to fight climate change by canceling your carbon tax? Because you told us for the last 6 years that you need a carbon tax to fight for the fight against climate change and fight for the planet. And now you're saying you're taking action for climate change by getting rid of the carbon tax. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Well, Pierre Poilievre basically neutralized this issue and hit back because he also vowed on Monday to eliminate the entire industrial carbon tax. So Mark Carney is eliminating the consumer carbon tax. The Conservatives already said that they would do that. And now the Conservatives are upping the ante, saying we're going to get rid of the entire framework. So no carbon taxes on any industry, including aluminum and steel. And again, basically calling the Liberals on their bluff. And we'll see if the Liberals come back. But here is Pierre Poilievre vowing to scrap the entire carbon pricing system. Let's play that clip.
Today I am announcing that a common sense Canada First Conservative government will repeal the entire carbon tax, including the federal backstop that requires provinces impose industrial taxes. There will be no taxes on consumers, no taxes on Canadian industries.
And so good for Pierre Poilievre, good for keeping this issue alive and making sure that Canadians know that there is a difference between Liberal policy and Conservative policy, and that Mark Carney can say that he's getting rid of the carbon tax, but we know that he believes in it. He's a deep believer ideologically. He wrote about it in his book Values. Cosmin Georgia over at True North has done comprehensive reporting and retelling Canadians what Mark Carney wrote in that book that he published in 2021, talking about the deep need for climate action in all aspects of the government. And, you know, he can walk away from an unpopular tax, which, by the way, the Liberal government is the one that made it unpopular, but that doesn't change his entire ideology and worldview. And I want to tie this with another story that we wrote about over at Juno News, which is this company, Northvolt AB, has filed for bankruptcy. This is a company that received $2.7 billion in subsidies from the Canadian taxpayers under the Liberal government. And so in a statement, Northvolt AB said that following an exhaustive effort to explore all available means to secure a viable financial and operational future for the company, the board of directors of Northvolt AB announced today that it has filed for bankruptcy in Sweden. And so recall that the Liberal government promised Canadians that they were going to build a new economy, a new green economy. Part of this was this idea that Canada was going to become the home to battery manufacturers and electric vehicle manufacturers. It was going to be the future of our economy. They were willing to put $2.7 billion into this idea. And it was always fake. It was always a fraud. If this was a real business model, if it had if there was interest in the availability to grow and to make money, it would be able to attract investment from the private sector. But the reason that no investors want to put money into it is because it's a scam. It's a scheme that doesn't work. It's not a sustainable business. And so it required the Canadian government to put money into it. And this is what Liberal scams always do. They line their pockets along the way. And this company never had a business model. And so it's facing the economic reality that you can't just create an industry through government bailouts and government subsidies. How often do we have to learn this lesson? I feel like we learn it again and again and again whenever a Liberal is in office. So the government seeks new backers for this bankrupt Quebec EV battery plant, as reported by the Western Standard. And this, folks, is the problem with the Liberal policy, right? Mark Carney, it's not just one tax. It's not just the carbon tax. It's not just one regulation or one killed pipeline or one green slush fund or a fake NGO or a never-ending growing bureaucracy. The problem with the Liberals' worldview is that their ideology with regards to climate is anti-Canadian. It kills the Canadian economy. It kills affordability for families, and it's punitive to people who are hardworking and pay taxes. It doesn't work. So you can promise to get rid of one tax, but that doesn't change the ideology, the entire net zero approach, which Mark Carney still desperately clings to. He holds onto it. You could see it in that Liberal post that they're still going to fight for climate change. What does fighting for climate change mean? Well, we've seen under this Liberal government over the last 10 years what it means, and it's not good for Canada, which is why it's important that Canadians know that. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit. I'm super excited to be joined by True North and Juno News' in-house pollster. So we did this during the 2021 election as well, where we hire a polling company to come and do exclusive polls for us during the election so that we can keep a pulse, our finger on the pulse of the country. We can figure out which ridings are important, what the strategy for the political parties should be. But in order to watch this interview, you have to head on over to junonews.com and subscribe. This is just for subscribers. So head on over, subscribe. You can watch this forthcoming interview with David Murray of One Persuasion. It's really important to support independent journalism so that we can continue to do this work to inform Canadians, because you know that the legacy media will continue to lie to you. You know that the legacy media is funded by the Carney Liberals, and they will do everything they can to try to make sure that Mark Carney remains in office, which means not telling you the truth about him and his disastrous policies. So again, head on over to junonews.com and subscribe, and the rest of the episode will continue over there. Thank you.